Hands behind your back. That was the first thing he heard. Not his name. Not a question. And when he looked up at the judge, she didn't see a student, she saw a threat. What she didn't see, was who his father was. Put your hands where I can see them. Darius froze, sunlight gleaming off the windows behind him as he stood just outside the corner grocery store. His soda bottle slipped from his hand and rolled toward the curb. I said get on the ground, barked the white officer, already reaching for his cuffs. What did I do? Darius asked, breath caught in his chest. You matched the description. Don't argue. Before he could say another word, the officer grabbed him by the arm, yanked him down hard onto the warm sidewalk, and twisted on the cuffs. Darius winced in pain as his face scraped the concrete. It was broad daylight. People had seen everything. Bystanders froze. One girl whispered, "Why is he being arrested?" Another already had her phone out, recording. "He was just buying something," someone muttered. Not resisting. Not yelling. The officer didn't care. He shoved Darius against the wall and radioed in. Suspect detained. Black male, gray hoodie. Appeared nervous. Could be gang-related. Darius had heard stories like this before. But this time, he wasn't reading it on a screen. He was the story. The cuffs cut into his wrists. His hoodie, clean and ironed, now stretched at the collar. He tried to steady his breathing, but shame and rage collided in his throat. All because he bought a soda. 2 miles away, in a sleek office inside City Hall, Mayor Marcus Ellis stared at his phone. The screen showed a viral video, his son being handcuffed in the open, no questions asked. His face didn't flinch. He simply said. "Which station?" His aide stammered. "What?" "The officer." "The court." "Find out everything." "I'm not going to interfere as the mayor. I'm going as his father." At the station, Darius sat on a hard bench in a holding room, staring through the glass at officers laughing like it was just another Tuesday. No one asked his name. No one offered a lawyer. "You'll be seen tomorrow," someone finally said. "Juvenile court. Judge Carpenter." The name echoed in his ears. She was the one known for sending messages. And kids like Darius? They were the message. But the courtroom hadn't seen this message coming. Because what no one in the precinct knew, was that the boy sitting alone in that holding cell, was the only son of the most powerful man in the city. And he was done watching silently. Darius sat stiffly in the holding cell. The cold metal bench dug into his back, and fluorescent lights buzzed above like an interrogation lamp with no questions. No one had asked him anything, not his name, not what happened, not even if he had a parent to call. The officers outside laughed with coffee cups in hand, talking about last night's football game like they hadn't just dragged a teenage boy off the street in front of dozens of witnesses. Through the bars, Darius stared straight ahead, fists clenched, eyes burning. Not from fear, but fury. He wasn't scared of jail. He was scared of becoming just another case file. At the same time, across the city, Mayor Marcus Ellis entered a quiet private room deep inside City Hall. 2 aides waited by the door. On the screen in front of him, surveillance video of Darius being processed. The mayor watched it in silence. He didn't flinch when the officer slammed Darius onto the fingerprint scanner. He didn't blink when the boy asked for a phone call and was ignored. Instead, he leaned in and said to his aide, "Schedule a judge. Now. I want to be in that courtroom." "But sir. I'm not going as mayor. I'm going as his father." Back at the precinct, the officers finally opened the door. "You're up. County court's backed up, so you're going to Eastbrook Juvenile Court." One officer smirked. "Judge Carpenter. Tough one. Likes giving lessons." Darius was led out in cuffs, his hoodie now dirty from the cell floor. He walked past the front desk, where a crowd of reporters were gathering, drawn in by the viral arrest videos. None of them knew who he was. And no one thought to ask. Inside the courtroom, Judge Deborah Carpenter flipped through the file lazily. "Another one," she muttered. "Resisting arrest, suspicious behavior near a store," matched a vague description. She looked up as Darius was brought in. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of him. "You again," she said. He blinked. "We've never met." She smirked. "I've met 100 like you. Same look. Same hoodie. Same story. Let me guess, you didn't do anything, right?" The bailiff chuckled. Darius looked around the courtroom. No public defender yet. No family. Just a courtroom full of strangers ready to judge him before he spoke. Then the back doors creaked open. A tall black man in a dark suit stepped inside. Calm. Focused. The judge paused. "Sir, this is a closed juvenile hearing." The man's voice was even. "Not anymore." "Sir, this is a private courtroom," Judge Carpenter repeated, tapping her gavel sharply. The tall man in the suit kept walking. 2 security guards at the back moved to block him, until they recognized his face. Marcus Ellis. The mayor. They froze. The entire courtroom turned silent. Even the bailiff stood upright, unsure whether to salute or call for backup. Darius looked up for the first time since entering the courtroom, and saw his father. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just exhaled. He wasn't alone anymore. "Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice steady, "I request that this hearing proceed with full transparency. I'll stand as a civilian. Not as the mayor." The judge stiffened. "You're interfering." "I'm witnessing," he replied. "The same way the public witnessed your officer kneel on my son's back in broad daylight." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Judge Carpenter glanced at the officers in the room, suddenly pale. "You're saying, he's your son?" Marcus turned to Darius. "I'm not saying. I'm showing." Darius stood silently, the cuffs still on his wrists. "This young man," Marcus continued, "was arrested without cause. Not a single question was asked. No ID was checked. He was profiled, cuffed, and processed as if the law was meant to humiliate him, not protect him." The judge tried to recover her posture. "Mr. Ellis, this isn't how we do things." Marcus stepped closer to the bench. "That's exactly the problem." He turned to the courtroom gallery. Journalists had already begun trickling in, phones raised. "You're not just judging a teen. You're showing this city how deeply broken the system is." Judge Carpenter's lips twitched. "Mr. Ellis, if this is political theater. It's personal justice," he snapped. "And if I weren't his father, no one in this courtroom would have cared who he was." The bailiff hesitated, then walked over to Darius and removed the cuffs. The sound of the metal unlocking echoed louder than the gavel ever could. Darius rubbed his wrists, but his eyes never left the judge. "I ask the court," Marcus said, "to dismiss all charges. Immediately. Or explain, on record, what crime my son committed." Judge Carpenter opened the file again. Her hands were shaking now. There was nothing inside but vague notes, suspicious. Matched description. No stolen item. No weapon. No threat. She stared at Darius. And for the first time in her courtroom, she had no words. Judge Carpenter cleared her throat. The courtroom was too quiet. Every move she made now felt watched, documented. Because it was. She turned her gaze to the boy standing silently in front of her. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice brittle. Darius didn't flinch. "Darius Ellis." "You didn't mention who your father was." He looked her straight in the eye. "I didn't think I needed to. I thought my rights were enough." Even the reporters paused their typing. Marcus placed a hand on Darius's shoulder but said nothing. He didn't need to. Darius had just spoken more powerfully than any campaign speech ever could. "I see no legal basis to move forward with charges," Judge Carpenter muttered, flipping through the thin file again. "You're free to go." "Say it louder," Marcus said, stepping forward. The judge's eyes narrowed. "This court finds no grounds for prosecution," she said reluctantly. "The defendant is hereby released." The gavel came down, softly. Not in control this time, but in surrender. As the officers moved to escort Darius out of the courtroom, a reporter called out, "Mr. Mayor. Was this arrest racially motivated?" Marcus turned. "This arrest was a mirror," he said calmly. "The question is, do you like what you saw?" The crowd murmured. Cameras flashed. And behind the judge's bench, her face flushed with something she hadn't felt in years. Accountability. Outside, sunlight hit Darius's face like freedom. He stepped down the courthouse stairs, surrounded by press, people cheering, and students holding signs that read, "We are Darius. Not another name. Justice starts now." But Darius didn't raise his fist. He didn't smile for the cameras. He looked straight ahead and whispered, "This ain't justice. This is survival." Marcus leaned close to him. "You good?" "I will be. But not until it changes for the next kid." His father nodded slowly. "Then we get to work." That night, news outlets across the country ran the story. Mayor's son wrongfully arrested, judge forced to drop case on record. Social media exploded. Clips of Darius's quiet courage spread like wildfire. But back in that same courtroom, Judge Carpenter sat alone, watching it all unfold. And for the first time in her long career, she wasn't proud of the sentence she didn't give. The morning after the courtroom clip went viral, Darius sat at the kitchen table staring at his untouched breakfast. His phone buzzed non-stop, texts from classmates, old friends, even strangers. Some said, "You're a hero." Others wrote, "I'm sorry I never said anything." But Darius didn't feel like a hero. He still remembered the cold cuffs. The officer's smirk. The silence in that holding cell. And no message could erase how small he felt. His father entered quietly, loosened his tie, and poured 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one for Darius. He sat down, watching his son. "I know what you're thinking," Marcus said. "I doubt that," Darius replied softly. Marcus didn't push. The city council's calling emergency meetings. The judge might face investigation. Darius finally looked up. "Why now?" "Because I'm your son." Marcus paused. "Maybe. But if we use this moment right, it won't be just about you." That day, Darius walked back into school. The halls were quiet as he passed. People stared. Some nodded. Others avoided eye contact. A few classmates clapped quietly when he walked into history class. He didn't want applause. He wanted them to remember all the other kids who didn't have a mayor for a father. Meanwhile, across the city, Judge Carpenter sat behind her desk, flipping through legal news articles that featured her name, most of them not kind. Her assistant entered with a notice from the city's ethics board. She'd been scheduled for a public hearing. Her past 5 years of juvenile cases were being reviewed. She stared at the stack of files on her desk. Dozens of names. All brown. All black. All filed under expedited sentencing. Back at City Hall, Marcus stood in front of a press podium. Darius watched from the back as his father spoke. "My son survived what too many don't. We can't just react. We must reform. I'm signing an order today for police review, court transparency, and a public defender expansion for every juvenile case." He looked at the cameras. And this isn't charity. It's justice. Afterward, Marcus walked back to Darius. Want to help design the reforms? Darius hesitated. Then nodded. I want to start with the kids' nobody records. The protests didn't last long. Not because people stopped caring. But because the headlines moved on. Another arrest. Another name. Another clip. And suddenly, Darius's story was yesterday's news. At school, things were quiet again. Too quiet. People weren't whispering anymore, they just avoided him altogether. Teachers smiled politely but seemed unsure what to say. Even his best friend, Jordan, hadn't texted in 3 days. Darius sat in the cafeteria alone. It wasn't hatred. It was isolation. Later that week, during civics class, the teacher was discussing policing policies. Darius raised his hand. I think the system isn't just broken, it was built this way. The room stiffened. One student muttered under his breath, easy for you to say. You had the mayor on speed dial. Darius turned slowly. And if I didn't? The student looked away. That night at home, Marcus found Darius sitting on the edge of his bed, shoes still on, hoodie still zipped. You okay? Marcus asked. Darius didn't look up. They think I'm lucky. You are. Darius shook his head. Not lucky. I was just, seen. That's not the same. Marcus sat beside him. So what do we do? Darius finally met his father's eyes. Show them the ones who don't get cameras. Don't make this about me. Make it about them. The next day, Marcus returned to City Hall with a folder titled Ellis Project, Unseen Youth Cases. It was Darius's idea, and it wasn't for press. It was a task force to dig through the court system's forgotten names. Juveniles with minor charges, locked up for months, no trial, no lawyer, no one watching. He brought in social workers, public defenders, civil rights attorneys. And quietly, case by case, the work began. Meanwhile, Judge Carpenter received a formal notice. One of her cases, a 14-year-old girl jailed for verbal disrespect during arrest, had just been overturned. The reason, due process failure. Her reputation was unraveling. But worse than the headlines was the silence in her chambers. No one calling for advice. No one defending her. And for the first time in years, she opened her own sentencing records, and actually read them. Across the city, Darius sat in the back of a courtroom, not as a defendant, but as an observer. He watched a nervous teen enter in handcuffs. Then he looked toward the judge, a new appointee. And quietly, Darius began taking notes. Darius had never liked courtrooms. They were too cold. Too quiet. Too full of people pretending to listen while waiting to decide. But this time, he wasn't in the defendant's seat. He sat in the back, observing, recording, remembering. The boy on the stand was just 15. Scared. Alone. No lawyer present. Arrested for loitering. Translation. Waiting for his sister outside school. No parent could afford to miss work to appear. No one knew how to request a public defender. The judge, a younger man, sharp suit, calm tone, looked over the file and said. Case dismissed due to lack of cause and due process. Let the record reflect this child should not have been brought here in the first place. It was said with no emotion. But to Darius, it meant everything. Later that afternoon, Darius sat across from his dad in the mayor's office. Marcus was reviewing early drafts of the Unseen Youth Protection Act. Darius pointed to a section. All minors must have legal counsel present at first hearing. Non-negotiable. Good, Marcus said. Want to write that into my speech? No, Darius said. I want to read it myself. That Friday, the city held its annual Youth Justice Town Hall. Normally, it was low attendance. Empty chairs. Quiet discussions. But this year, it was packed. Dozens of students, parents, activists, teachers, all gathered to hear what would come next after that courtroom video. When Darius took the stage, the room fell quiet. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't bring up what had happened to him. He started with a story, about someone else. A girl was locked up for talking back during arrest. She didn't know she could request a lawyer. She didn't know her school ID was enough to prove she was a minor. He looked across the room. She could have been me. And if I hadn't had a father in power, I would have been her. He didn't want applause. But the crowd stood anyway. Not clapping for him. Clapping for the idea of what could change. Outside, cameras rolled. But Darius didn't wait around. He left quietly, walking to a nearby youth center, where volunteers were prepping food and printing flyers for the city's new court literacy workshops. He grabbed a stack of them, handed them out. One kid, maybe 13, looked at him and asked, "You the guy from the video?" Darius smiled. "Doesn't matter. Just don't end up in one." Monday morning. Darius was back in the courtroom. Not to speak, not to protest, just to witness. It had become routine. 3 hearings a week. All youth. All underdocumented. Some charged with things as small as disturbing the peace for walking home with headphones in. Darius took notes. Quietly passed names to the reform team. Asked questions most adults didn't know how to ask. But one hearing hit different. A boy, maybe 12, stood trembling in front of a female judge. The arresting officer read from a file, attempted theft from a vending machine. No parent contact. No prior record. The boy barely spoke above a whisper. "I was hungry." The room fell quiet. No one said anything for several seconds. Darius stood up in the back. The judge looked up. "Are you here in any official capacity?" she asked. "No, ma'am. Just. I have extra lunch money today." Maybe he doesn't need a record. Just a meal. The judge leaned back, studying him. Then softly said, "Case dismissed. Child released to social services for follow-up." Outside, the boy walked up to Darius. "You serious about the food?" Darius nodded and handed him a sandwich from his bag. The kid grinned. "You a lawyer or something?" "No," Darius said. "But maybe you will be." That evening, Darius returned home to find Marcus in the living room, going over new appointment shortlists. He handed Darius one file. "Take a look." It was a judicial candidate resume. Darius read the cover letter. A single sentence stood out. "We need fewer judges who see statistics, and more who remember names." The next week, the Ellis reform package passed its first city vote. Every minor would now be guaranteed a public defender. All police stops of juveniles required full documentation and review. Dismissed youth cases would be sealed immediately, no digital footprint, no future damage. When Darius heard the vote passed, he didn't celebrate. He just exhaled. Then walked outside into the sun, pulled out his notebook, and added one line to the back page. One case doesn't change the system. But every kid saved rewrites its rules. It wasn't glamorous. He sat through hearings that went nowhere. Paperwork errors. Delayed judges. Defense attorneys running late because they were covering too many kids at once. But every now and then, he'd catch a name. A charge. A face. And he'd raise his hand to ask a question the system never expected a teenager to ask. Why is this child in custody if they were never Mirandized? Was there a guardian present during questioning? Why wasn't the arresting officer required to appear? The questions weren't attacks. They were reminders. That someone was paying attention now. One morning, Judge Carpenter returned to the bench. After weeks of silence and public backlash, she'd been quietly reassigned to a lower courtroom, no longer handling high-profile cases. But today, her name was on a docket again. Darius saw it on the schedule. He debated walking away. Instead, he stayed. The case was a 16-year-old accused of disorderly conduct for raising their voice during a traffic stop. No prior record. Straight A student. Carpenter sat with her usual straight posture, but something in her face had changed. The defense attorney requested dismissal. Carpenter looked at the teen. And for once, she didn't just skim the file. She looked at the student. She paused. Then said, "Dismissed. And I'll be recommending you for our civic youth internship, if you're interested." Gasps spread through the courtroom. Darius blinked. He wasn't sure if it was real growth, or political survival. But either way, the result was the same. One more kid didn't go behind bars. That night, Darius sat at his desk, flipping through pages of old court documents. He wasn't looking for flaws anymore. He was building something. A guidebook, plain language, clear rights, real stories, for every student in the city. At the top of the draft cover, he wrote the title. "Before They Call You Guilty, A Young Person's Guide to Surviving the System." The book launched quietly. No publishers. No billboards. No hype. Just 32 printed pages, stapled at the corner and passed hand to hand across the city. Middle schools. High schools. Rec centers. Corner stores. It wasn't thick. But it was loud. Inside were things the system never explained. What your rights are when stopped. How to ask for a lawyer and why you always should. Why silence doesn't mean guilt. What resisting really means, and how to survive it. And on the last page, a handwritten line from Darius himself. "You shouldn't have to be the mayor's son to be protected." Soon, teachers were printing it. Librarians were storing copies behind counters. Counselors started using it in detention intervention programs. Even officers, quietly, started reading it. Because they knew. No one had ever put it in writing before. One day, Marcus Ellis was invited to speak at a statewide justice conference. He was handed a speech by his communications director. He looked it over. Then put it down. Instead, he pulled Darius's book from his pocket and read the final page to a room full of lawmakers, judges, and city leaders. When he finished, the room didn't applaud. They stood. Not for him. For the truth. The following month, a video surfaced. A black teenager had been stopped walking home from basketball practice. He was calm. Respectful. But the officer raised his voice. The boy reached into his backpack, slowly, and pulled out a folded copy of Darius's booklet. He read a line out loud. "I do not consent to being searched. I am a minor. I request legal counsel." The officer froze. Then stepped back. The video went viral. Not because it was dramatic, but because, for once, it didn't end in violence. When Darius saw it, he said nothing. He just sent the video to his dad. The reply came instantly. "Your words are saving kids I'll never meet." That night, Darius walked past his old school. The mural outside the gym wasn't about him. It was a group of kids, hoodies, backpacks, different skin tones, holding up the booklet, not as a weapon, but as a shield. The backlash came quietly. Not from trolls or anonymous accounts, but from uniforms. Darius was walking home from the community center one evening when a patrol car slowed beside him. The window rolled down. 2 officers inside. Older. Hard stares. One of them smirked. "Ellis, right? You're the kid making manuals now." Darius didn't answer. Cute. Teaching kids how to talk back, huh? The car rolled off, slow and intentional. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder that some systems don't collapse, they recoil. A week later, the community center reported their Know Your Rights workshop had been cancelled. Reason? Security concern. Same with the library event. Reason? Budget cut. And at school, Darius's counselor pulled him aside. You've done incredible work. But I'm hearing things. Whispers about pressure from higher-ups. You may want to lay low for a while. Lay low. He'd done everything right. Peaceful. Legal. Policy-driven. But systems don't just fight fists, they fight visibility. That night, Darius sat with his father in the mayor's office. For the first time in weeks, the room felt heavy. I thought we were past this, Darius said. I thought we'd done something. Marcus leaned forward. We did. That's why they're pushing back. Darius looked up. So what now? We go quiet. We wait. No, Marcus said calmly. We go public. With the part they're trying to bury. The next day, Marcus called a press conference, not to celebrate, but to expose. He pulled out a folder labeled Community Event Suppression Requests. Emails. Cancellations. Memos. All tied back to police union leadership. He didn't yell. He didn't dramatize. He read the lines. One by one. Then stepped aside. And let Darius speak. I never asked to be arrested, Darius began. I never asked to be your example. He looked directly at the cameras. But if trying to stop other kids from ending up in that cell makes me a problem, then maybe the problem isn't me. That clip didn't go viral. It got buried in headlines about sports and scandals. But the people who needed to see it saw it. And that night, the workshop invites returned. Not from schools. From barbershops. Mosques. Churches. Parents' kitchens. They tried to silence a system changer. But instead, they made him louder, off the grid. 3 weeks passed. No press coverage. No interviews. No headlines. It was like the movement had disappeared. But underground, it was multiplying. Darius's workshops were now happening in private spaces, someone's garage in the East End, a church basement downtown, even a laundromat after hours. No cameras. No crowds. Just raw education. He wasn't trending. He was working. But the silence came with a price. Jordan, his best friend from before all of this, still hadn't called. Darius finally texted. We good? No reply. He walked by their old lunch table. Jordan sat there, headphones in. Darius tapped his shoulder. Jordan looked up. Didn't know if you'd remember me. Darius blinked. What? You're different now. Like you're untouchable. I'm the same. No, Jordan said quietly. You're not. You're careful. You're always watching your back. And you should be. That hit harder than any arrest ever could. Because it was true. Darius hadn't been just a kid since that sidewalk. He'd become a symbol. And symbols don't get to rest. That weekend, Darius helped with another pop-up workshop. A young boy asked a question that stopped him cold. What if I say the right words, and they still hurt me? Darius looked at him for a long moment. Then sat down across from him. You do everything you can. You stay calm. You know your rights. You memorize their rules better than they do. The boy frowned. But that's not fair. No, Darius said. It's not. That night, Darius went home and sat in front of the mirror. Same hoodie. Same face. But heavier eyes. He pulled out the notebook. On a clean page, he wrote. This system doesn't fear truth. It fears repetition. So we don't stop. He ripped it out and taped it to his wall. Underneath, he added a second line. And we teach the ones coming next. He looked at his reflection again. This wasn't about going viral. This was about going forward, even if no one clapped. Even if it hurt. The Ellis Reform Act finally reached its final vote. Packed city chamber. Public seating overflowed into the hallway. Darius didn't sit beside his dad this time. He stood in the back, hoodie up, notebook in hand. He wasn't there as the mayor's son. He was there as a reminder. As each article was read, right to counsel, mandatory video evidence for all youth arrests, sealed records for nonviolent juveniles, Darius watched the faces. Some council members voted yes because of public pressure. Some voted yes because they believed it. And a few still didn't. But when the last vote hit the screen. Passed. A quiet breath spread across the room like a wave. No applause. Just relief. The kind that makes your bones stop shaking. Outside City Hall, no cameras waited. Just two high schoolers leaning against a bike rack. One whispered, "Yo, that's him. That's Darius." The other shrugged. "Who?" Darius smiled as he passed. That's how you know it's working, when they don't even have to know your name. Later that night, Darius walked past the old courtroom. Lights off. Hall empty. Same cold floor. But something was different. A paper taped to the bulletin board read. Youth advocacy interns needed, paid. That would have been impossible 6 months ago. Now it was normal. Quietly revolutionary. He sat outside the courthouse steps and pulled out his phone. A message from Jordan. My little brother got stopped last night. He told the cop he wanted a lawyer. Cop backed off. He only knew what to say, 'cause of your book. Thank you. Darius stared at the screen. No emojis. No long speech. Just proof. He didn't reply. He just opened a new note in his phone and typed. The measure of change isn't how loud it is. It's how invisible the pain becomes. That night, Marcus stood over Darius's door, just watching. His son wasn't sleeping. He was sketching something on paper. A diagram. An idea. Another fight. Marcus didn't interrupt. He just nodded once and walked away. Because the city hadn't given Darius peace. It had given him purpose. Months passed. The headlines moved on. The country's attention shifted to new scandals, new elections, new noise. But in one small corner of the city, inside a modest office above a laundromat, a door bore a handwritten sign. The Center for Youth Legal Empowerment, founder, Darius Ellis. It wasn't fancy. A creaky floor. 2 plastic chairs. A mini fridge that buzzed louder than the computers. But it stayed open 6 days a week. Kids came in with questions. Came in scared. Came in after school, after court, after mistakes. And they left with something the system rarely offered. Preparation. One afternoon, a boy around 13 walked in, eyes wide. He sat across from Darius and said, I think I'm in trouble. Darius didn't flinch. He pulled out 2 things. A printed worksheet, and a bottle of water. Start here, he said. And breathe. Later that evening, Marcus visited the office. He looked around and smiled. More chairs than your old room. Darius grinned. Barely. He paused, then asked, do you regret it? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Regret what? Letting it all go public. Putting our name out there. Marcus walked to the window, looking out over the quiet street. No. Because they didn't just learn your name. They learned how far you'd go for others. That night, Darius sat alone, finishing up case notes when a letter slid under the door. No return address. Just a folded page with 5 words. Still watching. Still waiting. Still ready. No signature. No threat. But Darius understood. This work wasn't safe. It wasn't done. And it never would be. He pinned the note on the wall beside the first paper he ever taped up. This system doesn't fear truth. It fears repetition. Then he locked up, turned off the lights, and walked into the night, hood up, heart steady. He was no longer just the mayor's son. He was the reason other sons made it home.